Public hearing, December 10th, 2018, 6:30 p.m. Clerk, you want to call the roll?
Yes. Soretta?
Here.
Fonte?
Here.
Keesling? Here. Peters?
Here.
And Revolt?
Here.
Vice President, Mr. President.
All right, thank you. Motion to excuse members Foltz and Ware.
So moved. Second.
Fonte?
Yes.
Keesling?
Yes.
Peters?
Yes.
Revolt?
Yes.
And Soretta?
Yes. 5
yes to excuse Councilman Volt and Weir.
All right, thank you very much. All right, this meeting is to obtain public input regarding proposed amendments, Main Street Business District, Main Street Business District. Pat, do you want to make a comment before?
Give some color?
Yeah.
Okay. Certainly. Thank you, Mr. President. Just as color to this discussion, the Main Street Business District had been created a long time ago in a land far, far away. And one of the missing components that had been expressed over the years at the Planning Commission was, well, we really like the idea of the Main Street Business District and to provide, some relief to some of the code requirements that are in place generally throughout the city. There are certain conditions on Main Street that make it impossible to conduct business if we were to strictly adhere to those rules and regulations. Planning had expressed an interest in being able to conform with what the council had passed, and they needed a map. And so the chairman of the Planning Commission let it be known that we needed to get a map put together. In looking back at the commentary that had been offered regarding the Main Street Business District and working in conjunction with other city officials, we felt that the legislation or the Planning Commission's intent was to provide relief to size parcels that would not be able to conform to the existing parts of the code. And generally those are lots along Main Street that are 1 acre or less in size. Most of them, the vast majority of them are quarter acre parcels. So if we were to take, for instance, strict interpretation of the code as it applies throughout all the city, we take a parcel on Main Street, just the one closest by, just say the Pine Cone across the street. Literally the building is, 6 feet from the street on both sides. And if we're dealing with, putting a sign out that's to be on a pole, it's not possible to meet the setback requirements. Not that anybody's asking for a pole sign there, but this is just, an example of that. So, and it goes on and on as it relates to parking, to lighting, signage, just a whole bunch of issues there. So in order to try to, foster a pro-growth environment on Main Street, this was one component of it, establishing the Main Street Business District on a map so that we knew what parcels would be eligible for relief. That has gone to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission has approved it, sent it over to here, and that's the nature of your public hearing tonight.
Oh, and Patrick, just to clarify, when you say relief, you mean relief from the normal restrictions of the zoning?
Yes, that's correct.
So it's not like, just to clarify, it's not taxes, or it's really to better manage the zoning code, so that, because we got special needs along those with those businesses. Yes,
because the lots are developed so close to the street that
the normal setbacks and regulations just won't apply to that.
If they were, in this case, like with the pole sign, it'd be applicable. It'd be like inside the building, because you wouldn't be able to meet the setback requirement.
Right.
For example, Mayor, in 113704 has lot and density requirements the minimum lot size for office business and the GBA and GBB are each 40,000 square feet. However, the Main Street Business District, there is no minimum lot size. So any of those businesses currently on Main Street that have less than 40,000 square feet, if they've not maintained and more than 2 years have gone by and they've lost this legal non-conforming status, there's nothing that they can open up commercially. And we do have some situations there that areas can't be developed because they've closed that business, 2 years has gone by, they're under 40,000, nothing can happen there commercially. So this will give them reasonable relief.
It basically will give the zoning and planning some flexibility.
Yes.
Instead of just being black or white, there's a little gray area. Each case could be looked at on an individual basis, and an intelligent decision could be made. Again, we always go back to PAVs as one of the, test pilots. We were a few parking spots short. That whole situation would have went down the tubes if we didn't figure out some way to get the neighbor to work with them. We shouldn't have to do that. We should be able to work it out, which is what happened. And that's probably their busiest location out of all their locations.
It was a great success.
Yeah, so it's not a big deal, but it sure is nice to have in town if you like to go get ice cream. And there's lots of other small mom and pop shops that aren't multimillionaires that would like an opportunity. And who knows, maybe down the road, maybe some of those would be, taken and made into something a little bit bigger.
I'm feeling like a curmudgeon tonight, old and grumpy. I think this is a great idea, but I would only offer this caveat, is that we be conscious of the immutable law of unintended consequences, and that we, as we look at this and how it's implemented, that we make sure we've got adequate controls and adequate foresight to prevent problems. For example, how do we address parking? We've got residential neighborhoods that are close up. If we waive certain parking requirements, where does that parking go? I'm sure all of us would welcome calls from people who are living on Viking or wherever, that are complaining about late night parking. So it's something that we should, not that we have a problem, but it's something that we ought to think about, that we may have some issues that come up, and how do we make sure that we try to anticipate them as we grant approval for people to work outside the ordinance. And I support this, but I also just say, let's not be blind that we don't want to create an unanticipated problem.
I'm anticipating more foot traffic in the next couple of years.
So,
Yeah.
I think, well, never mind.
Anyone else? Mark, comments? All right. Well, at this time, we'll open it up to the residents. I'll ask that if you want to speak in opposition of this proposal, please step forward, state your name and address for the record.
Chuck Osborne, 307 Fairview Street, Southeast, North Canton, Ohio. Well, I'm going to be the continual contrarian because there's nobody in opposition to anything up here except me. I think this is very, very misguided. You've got residential lots with 100-plus-year-old homes. These homes are inadequate for even residential use. They don't even have adequate parking for the residential use. And I do applaud Mr. Revolt. You're correct. How are you going to work around the needs of a business and provide parking? Every one of these areas up and down Main Street abut up against residential areas. Mr. DRO talks about they're under an acre or less. The only value they have as a business is if you clear the property and combine numerous lots. This is what we saw over here at Dr. Suglio when he bought the funeral parlor. And they built, well, he bought the funeral parlor, but anyway, the bank, it was a Premier Bank that moved in over there. They took a whole long stretch. This is what you're going to have done all the way up and down on Main Street. There is no really gainful economic advantage for the city. Granted, you can provide some services that the community could use, a barber, a beauty parlor, small stuff like that, which is vitally needed. But again, I used to take an elderly gentleman to the barber down there on the west side of Main Street. I think there was maybe 3 parking spots there. And it was a struggle to find a parking spot, not that they're overrun with business. You don't want these lots to continue to exist. Extensive renovation of the property, the building itself, would dissuade people from coming in and utilizing that building. And you got a very nice map here, Mr. DiOrio. I'd like to thank you for that. I hope it's up to date this time. Look at all the gray area, R50. This city needs to modernize its code to outlaw some of these former uses. We've talked about here in the past about car dealerships, used car dealerships. When the zoning came into place in 2003, we zoned them out of existence. There's like 2 left in the city. This is what should be done with R50. I can walk up the stairs in my house and look out the window that's on that landing and look into the bedroom of the house next door. I have problems on my street. I can't even get out of my driveway because we have only single car drives up and down the street. Some people who are oblivious to their obstruction on the street pull their cars out and park them there all day long. So we need to be looking ahead. We don't want to preserve all these old houses up and down Main Street, not in my mind. We need to encourage the consolidation of these lots to bring more attractive, appealing, clearly, obviously, businesses. You don't know whether these are empty houses up there, whether there's a little mom and pop business in there, or what. So, I think you're totally misguided on this. Mr. Revolt, you're right. I don't know what business you could put in there that would, actually anything that you'd put in these places are going to exceed the available parking that the property offers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. All right. Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition of the proposed changes?
Mr. President?
Yes, sir.
Would you have the record reflect that Mrs. Warren has joined this public hearing?
Yes, thank you. Okay. Seeing that there's no one else who wants to speak in opposition, is there anyone who wants to speak in favor of the proposed changes? Okay. Seeing none, are there any more comments from either council or administration?
Could I make a comment?
Yes, sir.
What Chuck said, I agree with a lot of what he's saying. It is true. I was just looking for an avenue, an opportunity, if on a case-by-case basis, a mom and pop or a barber shop or somebody comes in that makes sense, there's some latitude and longitude for zoning planning to figure something out. But my ultimate goal is to see several of those parcels turned into something a little bit nicer. So, but I think this is a start, and I believe the reason why this was thought up in '03 is because the early council members or whoever started all this had vision, it just didn't go anywhere. So we're initiating it, and hopefully the positivity of this is going to bring more people, maybe more opportunities. We'll revise our zoning ideas, because I think a lot of things need to be updated. And I think if you could tell in the last 12 months, we've made a lot of improvements, and I think you're going to continue to see that with our group. So I agree with a lot of the things Chuck said in regards to, you know, we don't want to keep it small and tiny. We want it to be a nice, thriving, desirable area for people to walk, bike, and just enjoy the downtown. Okay? So that's my thoughts on it.
Mr. President, one other consideration that I don't believe that we've raised here, but it's certainly something to consider if indeed you are the property owner along Main Street and your lot density is under 40,000 square feet, and you perhaps purchase the property from someone, not realizing, perhaps not having title insurance for what may be an issue that you now face if that lot has been not in its prior use for the prior 2 years, you forfeited that permitted use that's there. And you now own a property that requires that you have 40,000 square feet, can only be used for business purposes, yet you don't meet the density requirement. There could be an argument made that, in effect, this zoning restriction is what's called a taking, is you're not permitting the owner of that property for any viable use.
That's what you're saying. In essence, what you're saying is proposed changes would eliminate the possibility of that taking.
Indeed, it could open up other avenues. Of course, you have to have the reasonable parking and setbacks and so forth, but the issue would not be these hard, fast rules for setback, spacing, density. It would be reasonable based on the type of purpose that you wish to utilize the property and the conditions that you're going to put in place. They have to be reasonable.
Okay.
And then just finally, to echo a little bit on what Mr. Fonte said, I too agree with a number of things that Mr. Osborne referred to, and the administration is working with professionals in the field about providing, changes to, the zoning code and how we can make, in effect, what he said happen to encourage the development of these parcels into larger parcels so that they can be turned into something more constructive. We all want that because we believe that it'll bring in other businesses that are able to employ more people and generate more tax revenue to the city. So it's really in everyone's best interest. But we need to keep in mind that that is a process that requires tremendous capital investment. It's capital investment made by the private sector, not by the city, and it could take decades to complete. And somewhere along the way, we obviously have to start the process, and we're going to have to provide the rules of engagement and the necessary incentives, to start the process ahead. So we are doing that. We expect to, have that on council's agenda for some discussion as we turn into 2019.
Excellent.
I think we'd all prefer that.
We're on the right track.
Okay. Any other comments? Council, Emmett?
I just think it's a favorable move to encourage, and that's what leaders do. They make moves to encourage things and gets things started, and we'll work from there. So I think it's a good deal.
Okay, very good. Well, seeing that there are no further comments from either council or administration, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please say
Aye.
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 Those opposed? The ayes carried by unanimous voice vote of ayes.
Okay. We are adjourned. A few more minutes and we'll start the council meeting. 4 minutes.